morning, they let me know you were gone. Suzanne, the plans they made put an end to you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me today for Deborah Kobylt Live. And on the phone with me right now is Dan Schuck. Dan, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Dan is a business leader, but he's also an author. He's on today to talk to us about his book, A Glass, Half Empty or Half Full. And the story behind this book is actually sad but really interesting, and he's turned a situation in his own life that is actually quite sad into something hopefully to help many other people and to shed a light on an issue that I'm reading more about, I know, suicide. Tell me a little bit about why did you write this book, A Glass Half Empty or Half Full?
Sure. Well, let me tell you about the book itself, and then it leads into why I wrote it. This is a children's book for grown-ups. It's kind of a unique format for a self-help book. It really is kind of a self-help book, but it's a really simple concept. It's about that question. This is an age-old question: is the glass half empty or half full? And my perceptions is that we have a misperception about this question and believe that it's a litmus test to tell us whether a person is one thing or another thing. So this has been something that's interested me my whole life, and as a business leader, as an executive at a financial services company, I used this analogy a lot to talk to people about looking at things from different perspectives. And so I sort of honed this story and talked about, more than just the half full, half empty parts of it, but, what does it mean to have some space in the glass? What does it mean to have a very full glass and the risk that you have that you might spill things out of your glass? All of those kinds of concepts. I wanted to pull that all together into something a little simpler, and I really honed this a lot with my partner, Jill. I met Jill about 5 years ago. Jill was quite an accomplished Hollywood film producer, and we fell in love. She was just going through a divorce, as was I, and we, kind of love at first sight, fell in love, and I soon learned that she was suffered from bipolar disorder, and it had been a big challenge for her throughout her whole life and career. And in fact, this glass half empty, half full concept, this way of looking at that question and using that to evaluate your life, is something that I really used with Jill quite a lot. Almost every day we talked about this, and really, you hear that term, sharpen the sword. This really sharpened the story, really sharpened the sword for me. So Jill was having a tough time just at the beginning of this year, another series of manic episodes, and having a really tough time with her career and family. And I was wanting to get this to her. We talked about it all the time, but I wanted to make a gift for her for Valentine's Day. So I had put this together as a, kind of a one-person gift to give it to her for Valentine's Day. And unfortunately, she committed suicide the week before Valentine's Day. So that's kind of what led me, that's what the book's about, what led me to write the book. Her having passed away so horribly, right before I was able to give it to her, sort of obviously put me into a tailspin, and I used the continuing to work on the book and getting it into a place where I could publish it and get it out to other people as sort of a way of coping with that horrible situation.
Let's talk a little bit about Jill. She was the producer of Mean Girls. She's a very, very successful woman, beautiful woman. She also worked with Harvey Weinstein, and I know that entire situation really threw her, didn't it?
It really did. It really did. She had been Rose McGowan's manager back when Rose was, just starting in the career, and when Rose's infamous incident with Harvey happened. Jill was also a young, manager at that time, and was caught up in that situation. And unfortunately, that coming back up years later, Jill was sort of implicated in that, and herself not directly involved in the story, but sort of indirectly involved in the story. It put her name in the paper, and really was a very stressful time. And what I found in learning so much about bipolar disorder in my life, especially in these last years of knowing Jill, is that those very stressful situations in life, before that it was a divorce, those kinds of things often trigger episodes, often trigger, dark depression or manic episodes. And these manic episodes for a bipolar person can actually lead to psychosis, lead to having unrealistic beliefs about the world, including the idea that suicide is a good idea.
Did she talk much about suicide when you were together?
No, really didn't.
Wow.
Occasionally, it's hard not to suffer from years of serious depression and not have had the thought, but never in terms of, hey, I feel like I'm going to act, any of those kinds of things, and never any suicide attempts in her past. No note, no plan. This was very much
Nothing.
I kissed her
nothing
goodbye that morning and went to work, and by lunch I was getting a call. It was just the.
I am so sorry. That is so sad. I mean, even for me to hear this, I'm quite frankly speechless because I don't know how one goes through that. I have to tell you, about a month and a half ago, I got a call about someone that I had worked with, and she's a mom of 2 young kids, and I found out that she had committed suicide in not a very pretty way. And to this day, I think about it all the time. I wasn't a bosom buddy friend of hers, but I liked her so much. She was kind and she was sensitive, and how was anyone to know? I don't know if she thought about it much. Somebody said to me, well, she was depressed. It's like, well, what do you mean, well, she was depressed? We need to shed a light on this stuff. It's serious. There's a real stigma to mental illness. I think we talked on the phone. I told you I don't even like the phrase mental illness because if somebody is told that they're mentally ill, right there, they don't even want to admit that there's a problem. Bipolar, for example. A lot of people will say, what are you, having a bipolar moment? But what is bipolar? Do you know what I mean? It's an overused phrase. What is it exactly?
It is, yeah.
Can you explain that to us?
Both of these things, suicide and mental illness or mental health disorders, have such strong stigmas, and they always have. I mean, you can go back in our history and see it's not like mental health disorders just started recently. We talk about them more than we ever did, and that's actually progress. But still, we talk about them with a lot of stigma. We have overcome some of the stigmas that we have about other types of handicaps in our society, right? We don't use terrible words to describe handicapped people. We used to use cripple and all these terrible terms like that, and those kinds of terms have gone away, but that's not as true yet with mental health. We do tend to sort of sling the words around and talk about this in uncouth ways.
Right, and then the person feels awful about themselves. Who wants to go into a room and say, oh, I have this, like I just had surgery on my knee. It's clear that I have a temporary disability. That's okay, right? But imagine walking in the room and going, I have a disability. I'm bipolar. I'm nuts. I don't mean people are nuts. What I'm saying is people start to feel like they're nuts, and then they're ashamed. And I guess what I'm trying to say is we have to get rid of the stigma because we're all in one way or another afflicted by this, whether it's a family member, whether it's ourselves. And I think you're right about that. Something major happens in your life and you can just automatically be in a situation mentally that you're not prepared for. But again, how does one act, if you will, when they're bipolar? Is it a daily thing? Is there one thing that tends to set them off? Could you explain that?
Sure. Let me talk a little bit about that. Let me back up and just mention that mental health is something we all have. We all have physical health and we all have mental health, and we do exercises to deal with our physical health. And there are things that we can do to all sort of take care of our mental health. When someone has a physical disorder, they have to do extra things or special things to deal with their physical health. And the same is true of mental health disorders. So someone who has a mental illness or a mental health disorder, like bipolar, will have to take additional medications. That's one of the big things that can be done. There are also other types of therapies that can be done to deal with this. To get to your question, to answer that, it's not a one size fits all. There's not that this is what it looks like. Everybody's because this is a disease of the mind, if you will. This really affects the personality of the person themselves. It's sometimes hard to read, but bipolar really means it's a form of depression. It's a lot of it is a depression piece. In my experience of it, knowing not just Jill but a number of people who have been afflicted by this, there tend to be long periods of dark depression, months or even years of dark depression. But bipolar, the reason it's got that term is that it also has manic episodes. It's got these periods where the person will suddenly feel better and, in fact, completely better, way better, too better. They start to get manic and over-energized. A lot of people really channel this. They're able to use this, and frankly, you see it in the arts. A lot of people in the arts who have this become very productive, put full scripts together, work day and night, get things done, become very focused on one thing,
I think you're right about
to the point of obsession. And there's sort of this balance back and forth. Those manic episodes can be very dangerous. That's when people can lose touch with reality and become psychotic. There's all kinds of symptoms about, spending money that they don't have, those kinds of things. The tough thing is for the people who love them, that person has just changed. They've turned from being very generally docile, depressed kind of to themselves to being very animated, out of control, and it's just very difficult to deal with.
How did you deal with it? Because you clearly loved her, knowing that she was bipolar and had manic episodes. How did you deal with it?
Okay, that's a softball question for me because I dealt with it with this concept, this glass half empty, half full concept, using this exercise, and it really is just that. This isn't a storybook. It's really more of a let's talk about this from different perspectives. It's not very many pages. It's a pretty quick thing to get through. But I would go through those when she was having those episodes. We would talk about, literally, I would hold a glass of water, half glass of water in my hand, and talk about, well, what do you see today? What do you think today the glass is? And what do you think about the space above the glass today? And what do you think about the cracks in the glass today? And just use some of those exercises. I couldn't solve her problems with this exercise. That's not what it's about. A lot of what was, hey, have you taken your medications? Do you need to see a doctor? Those kinds of things.
How kind.
But in terms of
really?
Being there for her, I used this paradigm, this half-class paradigm to talk with her almost every day about how she was doing.
I think kindness. People who are feeling that way really need someone like you around them. Kindness is so important instead of being mocked or made fun of. Let's look at kids sometimes. Someone that they know may be going through something awful, and then they'll go, oh, he's crazy, he's nuts. If I hear that in my own house, I put a stop to it right away. I'm like, look, you don't know what somebody's going through. It's not your job to define someone's behavior. Your job is to be kind or say nothing at all. It makes me very upset, and then I think there's such a stigma to it that I really think it just it proliferates. It makes it worse for the person as they grow
I agree. The other thing I would add to kindness is patience. This is not easy. When the person is not acting like themselves and not being reasonable, you can reason with just about anyone with any other kind of an affliction. But a lot of times, a mental health disorder, you really can't reason with that person or get them to see what seems so obvious to everyone else. So it takes a lot of patience.
But just the simple way in which you describe situations in the book, such as most of us have cracks in the glass. I mean, in other words, it's true. There's so much of what you say, it's simply written, but the message is right on point. And there is some threat that we may lose some of what we have. In other words, the way you say it is so well done, simply put, but I think you get the message there. I mean, this is a terrific book. I also think you say it's a children's book for adults. I think it's also very important for kids to read, too.
I think, I've actually had quite a following with teenagers, with adolescents who are going through life change. This is sort of a way to look at it. It was pretty popular around graduation time, to talk about this. That's about when the book came out. I think you're right. It's also the kind of thing that it's not so much the book, but the exercise of thinking this way and going through all those questions about the glass is something that you can do at different times of your life or even different times of the day and get a different answer. Really say, well, where am I today? The concept, of course, is that the glass is your life, right? When we use this phrase, we're generally talking about, is your life half full or half empty, or where do you see things? You may be talking about an aspect of your life. But it's also important for us to remember that what's in the glass is always changing. We're drinking out of the glass. New things are getting poured in the glass all the time. We pour some of those things in the glass, and then other people put things in our glass. Other things come into our glass that we have to drink and deal with, whether we put it there or not. So, that idea that you have to balance your glass and always be assessing it, including, as you mentioned, the cracks in the glass, the idea that, some of it may leak out. You may lose some of it.
That's right. Other than medication, and I know you're not a doctor, is there something else that someone can do if they're feeling so incredibly despondent or suicidal? Because I don't know. If someone's really down, I always say go out, go for a walk, go do something, get out of your space. Does that work or not really? A person who truly is suicidal can't even think that way to get themselves out of it. Self-help
your way out of this is probably not the best answer for someone who's suicidal, right? So I think, there definitely is let's make sure you change your environment and think about things. But I think one of the most important things I would say about this is get help. This is a place where when someone is actually feeling that despondent, you definitely want to keep the person talking, talk to them with open-ended questions, more of the, kind of what would that mean, leading questions, things like that, be an active listener piece. But more than anything else, I would say, make sure you're keeping the suicide prevention hotline number close by, that you're able to call for help, get some professional help. In addition to medication, the big number two, the other next most important thing for any kind of a mental health disorder, and frankly for just mental health balance, and for many of us, is therapy, is having someone to talk to. It doesn't necessarily, I think, for everyone, but certainly for people who are in sort of a dire need, professional therapy, someone that they can really talk to about these things and can help assess them, is really, really important. We can do that for each other, right? We can all be therapists for each other, but there's a place to recognize, where do I need to make sure I'm bringing in some professional help and not leaving this to my best judgment.
What really surprised me, suicide is the second leading cause of death for people under the age of 35. That really surprised me. It's massive, because I think the emotions are so strong. There's just no way out, right?
It is. The leading cause of death for young people are accidents, car accidents, things like that, right? So, so the second leading, and so that, the second leading cause is their own hand, them choosing that. Now, that's been true for a long time, actually. That's not a new stat. That's something, I'm not a teenager or even close to it, but when I was, that was still true then. There was a lot of news about that. What's really changed in the last 30, 40 years is that number has really increased in middle-aged people. So it's very true that teenager angst and those problems, it's now the fourth leading cause of death for people between 35 and 55.
Is that
so at that age, and that's been a major increase. That's a 40% increase since 1999.
Do we have a higher rate of suicide in the U.S. than proportionally than in other countries?
We don't. We're in the top, but we're not the highest rate. But I think it might be Iceland is the highest. There's some other countries that I've looked at that have a higher rate. But that rate is internationally climbing. It's across. It's not just a U.S. statistic. It's internationally creeping up.
Why?
Some of that is statistics magic, right? Some of that is, but that's because we're curing other kinds of diseases and things. So there's better health, and so it's just raising the total number isn't necessarily going up. But we've got better prevention on the other sides. And some of that is clearly something is going on in our society. I think mental health is in the news all the time, usually with negative connotations. Often very negative things have happened related to mental health. I think we're more aware of it. I don't want to blame technology, but our ability to use technology to communicate more quickly with each other has, in some ways accelerated mental health challenges for some people. Will drive it.
And I also think the terms, there's such an awful stigma. At least I feel that way. I would not want to be labeled as something. I would prefer someone saying, "Look, this is what's going on." Does that make sense? I mean, at least that's for me. Wow. This is so sad. So some tips that you give us, if you fear that a loved one could be suicidal, right? Could you go through them very briefly for us? You give 5 tips.
Sure. So, and I gave a few of them already. I think my most important one is to get help. That's my 5th tip, and kind of the big important one is to make sure that you get help. But let me start with it's important that you not simplify the problem for the person, that you not say, "Oh, that's not that big of a deal," and all you got to do. Those kinds of answers will scare them away, will make them not really want to talk to you about the problem. So it's important to if you can get them to talk to you, which is the most important thing, that you don't belittle the problems, that you take seriously what they're saying. That's just so key. Another really important one, and I mentioned this one too, is being an active listener, sort of soliciting their ideas, and asking them questions that lead them to think further. You don't want to be condemning with those answers, but you do want to ask, well, why do you think that, and what would happen if, and those kinds of open-ended things that elicit more discussion and bring those along. Now, those are the easier types of things to do. The harder one to do is to control your own emotions. And the one that I really had to be challenged with often was controlling anger, making sure that I wasn't getting angry at the person. It's so easy when someone mentions that they're just not doing well or that they're feeling suicidal or something like that to feel, what would that do to me? And what would that mean to your loved ones? And to get sort of angry right at that person. And that's definitely not helpful. That's again, going to make them not want to share their feelings with you. So it's sort of important to be bigger than the problem and sort of keep yourself in check and really sort of elicit their ideas. And then, again, I'll just repeat it over and over. Most importantly, get help. Make sure you're using all the resources that exist out there for.
So much in the news about suicide and public people who are committing suicide. What do you do, such in a case as yours, when you left for work and you really didn't think that person was going to even harm themselves that day? Sometimes maybe there isn't a sign. They may be depressed and have other situations going on, but sometimes you don't even recognize it. What do? There's nothing you can do.
Well, yeah, I guess I'm kind of flat-footed there. There is at some level nothing you can do, and some of it is kind of how we all react to it. I look back on that with obviously a ton of guilt and saying, gosh, I wish I would have gotten this book to her a week earlier. Gosh, I wish I would have noticed some of these signs. I wish maybe I hadn't been as angry, when she did say things that made me like, well, gosh, can't you just get over this? There's a lot of these tips that are self-warned. So it's not necessarily true that someone's going to come to you and say, hey, I'm thinking about committing suicide. Do you have 5 things you can do to help me? That's probably not the way it's going to come to you. It's really, a lot of it is being observant. I wish I can tell you that I was more observant, but certainly there are lessons to learn there. At some level, I will also say there's nothing you can do. There's some level of if someone is going to do this, that's a bleak outlook, but there's some level of we have to learn how to accept that.
Dan, I think you were an outstanding partner for her. You were very understanding to her and very kind to her. And the fact that you were even working on this book before she took her life, I think is outstanding, and it shows that you cared about this. And you're going to be helping a lot of people with this. I have one parting thing to say. I heard, you may know his name. There is someone who tried to commit suicide by jumping off of the Golden Gate Bridge. And this is quite a while back. And as he jumped, he said, oh, no, please, God, if you let me live, if you just let, on his way down, he remembered his thoughts. Mm-hmm. If you let me live, I will spend the rest of my life telling people that I wanted to jump that minute. I wanted out. And as I was going down, I thought, no, I don't want out. I don't. Most people don't get the chance, but he got the chance to live. And he now spends his entire life talking about it and saying, I'm somebody who tried it. And as I was on my way down, I thought, my gosh, I could have gotten another job, a wife, anything. But I can't get my life back. So I always thought that was such a telling story. From someone who was there, if people can remember that, if they're feeling so despondent. I mean, I offer really no advice, except I think it's so sad, and but I like to tell that story often.
Yeah, I think what comes from that for me is this idea of, who was there anyone for him to be able to talk to? Did he have to, realize that on the way down? And can we find ways to get people who are feeling this way, or if you are feeling this way, talking to someone else. Sometimes talking to someone you don't know that well about it may be helpful. And that's, again, where I'm going to keep repeating this, the National Suicide Hotline. Let me give you that number, too. That's 800-273-8255.
Say it again.
Really important number.
Let's say that again, please.
It's 1-800-273-8255.
Just remember that number.
Here's my tip for you is put that in your contacts of your phone. Keep that number. 911 is easy to remember. This number is a little hard to remember. 1-800-273-8255. You don't have to be the suicidal person to call that number. You can call that number if you need help with someone. Get help is my main thing. And that person needs someone to talk to, whether that's you or a professional or someone they don't know. That's what we can do.
Dan Schuck, thank you so much for joining us today. Your book, A Glass, Half Empty or Half Full. Please pick it up. It's an important book. It's a very easy read. I applaud anyone to just go out and buy it. This is something that's really important. Read it yourself. Give it to someone who you think might be hurting. And I just appreciate your coming and sharing your story with us. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Appreciate it.
You have a great day. And thank you, everyone, for being here for Deborah Kobylt Live. And we'll see you next time.